what impact do you hope to have in this new role?
The easiest answer is just at its core, help people thrive in high demand environments. I think
Hmm.
that's the tagline that I keep coming back to, the tagline that keeps guiding my
Hmm.
work, that keeps guiding my decisions and my own evolution as a worker.
Welcome back, everyone, to The Growth Project, a podcast put out by AMPLOS. We're really excited to be here today to bring you another episode. I'm really excited to introduce all of our listeners to a new hire we're having join our AMPLOS team, a new team member. We'll be introducing Anthony today, talking about the addition he's going to bring to our team. So, on that note, welcome, Anthony.
Thanks, Gabby. Happy to be here.
Just so I let our listeners know, this your full name is, and if I butcher it, let me know. But Anthony Alibro.
That is correct.
Okay, so I got it. And you and I actually kind of go way back, quite a few years. We did our masters together at Florida State, and gosh, when was that? Remember the years?
I do, yeah. So I got to Florida State in 2020 and then graduated in 22.
Okay, so yeah, almost 6 years ago we met. It's been a while, and 4 years since I've seen you. I guess the first time I saw you again was when we brought you to Greenville for your in-person interview.
Yeah, a little bit of a different dynamic than how we used to hang.
Yeah, just slightly different. Well, just so we kind of frame this up for our listeners, I mentioned that we brought you in person for an interview, and so that kind of hits on the target that you're not actually located in Greenville. You will be joining and I guess by the time this has been put out, you will have officially joined our AMPLOS team at the Elliott Davis office in Nashville.
Yeah, super stoked. I'm only like 15, 20 minutes right outside the heart of Nashville. So perfect fit, perfect location. Excited to get started.
Yeah, I know we're excited to have you on board, excited to be expanding into the Nashville market, which we'll have some more conversation about here in a moment. I'd love to give the listeners a little bit of backstory on, your journey, how you got to where you're at today. So tell us a little bit about your background, professionally and personally, of course.
Yeah. So grew up in Sarasota, Florida, which is about an hour south of Tampa, known for the beaches. So do miss that now being in Nashville. Sports were everything in my life. My dad and my grandfather were really big on baseball. I was not as big on baseball, even though it was the sport that I went farthest with. So I played a lot of baseball. I played football and basketball as well. Ultimately, just carried that passion all the way through high school until I got to college and I got an academic scholarship going to the University of South Florida. And to be completely honest, I had no idea that the field of sport psychology existed at that point. When I got into college, I was like, I'm going to be a physical therapist. And then I ran to general chemistry. I was like, I'm not going to be a physical therapist, actually. So I got into psychology and I knew I wanted to be within the field of psychology. I just didn't know what I wanted to do.
Mhm.
And about my junior year, I got into a class called physiological psychology. And it's basically the brain's contribution to psych. And I
Mhm.
fell in love with that. I thought it was the most pure science within psychology. And it actually led me to 2 years of neuroscience research after I had graduated at the National Institute of Mental Health out in Bethesda, Maryland. And here I was in my lab coat working with animal models for 2 years. And I thought that was the path I was going to go down. My PI at the time was really excited for me. And, about a year and a half into the position, I kind of had like a 23-year-old life crisis, I guess would probably be the best way to put that.
Yeah.
I was like, oh boy, I was like, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to spend the rest of my life in a lab working with animals and trying to put the puzzle pieces together, so to speak, of what is neuroscience, what is the human
Mm.
brain? So I had applied to a couple neuroscience PhDs, and then I also applied to the sports psychology master's program at Florida State. And I told myself, well, I'll go through these processes, go through the application process, and I'll make the decision when I get there. So I ultimately got
Mhm.
accepted to one neuroscience PhD and one Florida State master's in sports psychology program. Spoiler alert, I did end up choosing the master's program in sports psychology. That's how Gabby and I know each other. But at the end of the day, I really wanted to help people. I wanted to work face to face with people, with performers of various domains, whether that be athletic, whether that be military, which I can go into later, or whether that be more in the corporate executive domain as well.
Mm-hmm.
And just seeing the fruits of my labor, seeing those interactions with people and being able to help them realize their fullest potential was something that I was really passionate about. So that's what led me to Florida State and led me to my degree in sports psychology.
Wow. That's I think I even learned some new things there about your past. Let's start with early childhood. You talked a little bit about your sport experience. What were some of the biggest lessons you learned now reflecting back from your time as an athlete?
Especially looking back on it now and having like the theory, the knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
the all the things that come with a degree and experience, like looking back at my own experience as an athlete, as I was a head case, for lack of a better term. I mean, the realist example comes from when I played baseball. I was a third baseman. I was a much, much better fielder than I was a hitter. So I have vivid memories of me going to the batter's box and like it felt like my heart was beating out of my chest. And I was just telling myself, don't strike out, don't strike out, don't get caught looking. And naturally, when you tell yourself that more avoidance language, that's exactly what happened. Was I would strike out and be in my own head, and I wasn't in the game. My mind wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish there was like a story I could say like, well, like, and then, I met a mental performance consultant and it all turned around. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case. So there were things that I tripped up on and like basically learned implicitly. So there was like a routine that I would implement where I would bat against my cleats, take a deep breath, take like a little practice swing in my warm up before I approached the plate. That helped a little bit, but I could never pinpoint like, oh, that's why this helped. Like it helped me to settle in. It helped me to gain some familiarity, gain some of that calmness needed to
Mm-hmm.
execute at a high level. So yeah, I would say, especially in my athletic career, I was very much in my head, very much a sufferer of performance anxiety.
Yeah, I think that's something, a lot of us can relate to. And I loved what you said there about, self-talk and how it can almost be like we talk about the self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Where, what you tell yourself to do or not to do, whether it's positive or negative, increases the likelihood of that happening.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking about, hey, don't strike out, doesn't matter what is your brain hearing, strike out. And what do you end up doing most of the time? Striking out. So it's a very common principle we talk about within sport and performance psychology. And, I loved hearing how that came to life in your own experiences. Now, you talked about, you were on this neuroscience path, which is so fascinating. Spent a couple years in that lab environment. And I know you said you did something I like and that I relate to, in that you were like, well, I'm just going to apply to these options and see where life takes me and make the decision at a later point. And it's almost like this mentality of trusting the process. But I always say, in order to trust the process, you have to have a process. I'd be curious to hear a little bit about that decision-making process for you. So when you were accepted to both, talk to us a little bit more about what was that defining moment that led you to the Florida State program?
That's an excellent question. It takes me on a trip down memory lane, that's for sure.
Yeah.
When I was doing neuroscience research, I was really, really fortunate to be surrounded by just absolutely brilliant people, like the people at the top of their field within the neuroscience community. And we can talk about imposter syndrome in another podcast episode, because that's a whole other story. But when I thought about my day-to-day doing neuroscience research, a lot of it was conducting experiments. A lot of it was in the nitty-gritty, in the weeds a little bit more. But what I really loved about neuroscience was trying to put the puzzle pieces together, was trying to say, okay, like, here's what my experiment produced. Here's how it lines up with other research. Here's what we are able to realize in terms of these neural circuits and how they promote or facilitate XYZ behavior. Or when they're interrupted, maybe this can lead us to some insights in terms of like how this mental disorder operates, or maybe how this one can be cured. But if I did like calendar audit, how much of my days were actually doing that? And
Right.
Really, it turned out to be about 5 to 10% of my time, maybe even less than that on most days, where I was thinking big picture, where I was interacting with people and collaborating on a day-to-day basis was more limited in nature. So I think ultimately when I got the acceptance letters, I think I had about a week to
Hmm.
make that decision. And I talked about it with my then girlfriend, which is not my now wife, and I talked about it with a couple of supervisors there. And I was like, what do I enjoy? Like, what do I actually enjoy in my day to day? And it was to work with people. It was
Hmm.
to help people and to get those light bulb aha moments, so to speak. And I knew that the field of sport and performance psychology was going to allow me to realize that much more frequently than a career in neuroscience. So
Yeah.
I would say at the end of the day, it took a lot of reflection, and it was not an easy decision because,
Hmm.
as we know, you have to. It isn't as though you get a scholarship for the master's program at Florida State, but for the
Yeah.
neuroscience PhD, I would have had a stipend that would have been paid for. So going back to my family and being like, "Hey, I got this decision." My grandfather's like, "Well, don't be stupid. Go the neuroscience route." And I was like, "Thanks,
Yeah.
Pop. I appreciate that." But I followed my gut ultimately,
Hmm.
and then I think it all worked out. I couldn't be more happy with the decision I made and the experience that I've had up to this point within the field of sport and performance psychology. So, yeah, just helping people thrive in high demand environments has been incredibly fulfilling.
You kind of segued us perfectly into where I wanted to go next, was about your experiences post graduate school and some of the career paths that you've been on. Share a little bit about what your journey looked like after graduating with your master's.
Yeah, so about 3 months after I got my master's degree, I had applied to the Master Resilience Trainer contract with the United States Army. For the listener who doesn't know what that is, essentially the main goal of that contract is to practice sport and performance psychology with tactical populations. And depending on what base you're at, that can look a lot of different ways. So
Mhm.
I've spent the last 3.5 years prior to this new position, obviously, at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, with the 101st Airborne Division, better known as the Screaming Eagles, for the listener who knows a little bit of the military lore there. And really, what the role has been is to integrate with these populations, with our service members and their families, and find ways to increase lethality and increase resilience. If I go into every single one of the experiences, this podcast episode will be about 4 hours, but I'll go into the highlight reel. So one of the most fulfilling things that I got to do is we collaborated with the Special Operations Recruiting Battalion. And basically, when you think about the career of Special Operations, this was the initial step to get in. This was the door essentially
Right.
to get into this path. And these soldiers, men and women, would prepare for a 3-week course of Special Forces Assessment and Selection, for shorthand SFAS. And you want to talk about mental toughness, you want to talk about mental performance. The entire intent of the course is to get you to quit. Like it is a
Mm.
3-week course that is meant to drain you physically and mentally and get you to question everything. And what we did was we devised a preparation process, both at a team level, but also we work with these soldiers on individual level and talk through the mental skills necessary and what would give them ultimately an edge over their fellow candidates to
Mhm.
stand out. It is
Yeah.
an evaluated course. It is very heavily performance based, but as much of that is, there's a lot of downtime there. And especially day in and day out, when you're pushing yourself to your physical and psychological limits, what you tend to see are men and women get into their own heads.
Mm.
They start to think about their families back home. Oh, well, my wife's pregnant at home. I shouldn't be here doing this. Or, oh,
Mm.
I'm sure Bitcoin's falling off a cliff right now and I have to tend to my finances. So I shouldn't be
Yeah.
here right now. Or if I'm in this course with Gabby and I see Gabby absolutely killing it, I'm like, there's no way Cadre are going to pick me up to continue to go onto this course. Like I should just cut my losses now, save myself from injury. And
Mm.
so much of that self-talk that we were talking about at the beginning of the episode plays such a crucial factor within that. And that was incredibly rewarding, is to be able to work with those individuals and to tailor the mental skills that we teach, that we preach, and be able to find ways to integrate them within that 3-week course. And when they'd come back from that course, we'd have basically a debrief and like, hey, like, what happened, how did it go? And they would
Mhm.
talk about like, yes, it was physically grueling. I lost like 20 pounds, everything hurts still to this day. But the way that they acknowledged the mental component, like, it was they could feel their self-talk change. They could find ways to plug in imagery and visualization. Everything that we talk about in terms of team cohesion and team efficacy just ultimately plays a factor in their success as a team, but ultimately as an individual too. So that's the one that stands out the most to me, and the one that I take the most pride in terms of my experiences with the U.S. military, U.S. Army specifically.
Yeah, it's such a unique experience. And we talk all the time about how the field of sport and performance psychology, there are so many different pathways people take, whether that be focusing in on the sports realm or the organizational realm, or now we just discussed the military as well. And we always say, like, the skills that we're teaching and promoting are life skills. They're applicable to all domains. So it's finding, I think the best practitioners are the ones who are able to find the best ways to translate those skills to these different populations. I'd be curious to hear, you came from a sport background, then you went into military. What were some of the, I guess, biggest challenges shifting from that domain to this one?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's funny you mentioned that, because when I was at Florida State, one of the things I wanted to really do was to push myself out of my comfort zone. So I was like, okay, I have this list of teams and sports that I can work with. So I ultimately chose a cheerleading squad, which I knew nothing about. And I also chose a rowing team, rowing crew, which I also knew nothing about. But I knew it was going to ultimately lead me to be a better consultant, because I would have fresh eyes and I would have the approach of a mental performance consultant. So the military is an incredibly unique beast, would be the lightest way to say that. There's a lot of language that you do. There's an acronym for everything too, and there's so many acronyms that I'll use with my wife sometimes. She's like, what are you talking about? Like, who are you talking to right now? And I don't even realize that I'm using it still. So I'm like, oh, it means X, Y, Z. But I think the biggest thing is, when people typically think of the Army, usually it's just like everybody's within the infantry, right? Like they see all the movies, the Band of Brothers, so to speak. But the Army is massive. There's dentists in the Army, and their main role is to serve as dentists for service members. There are people that specialize in infantry. There are people that specialize in air defense artillery, which is missile defense ultimately. And getting into each unique team and unit and organization, and just learning it on the fly, learning what their day-to-day looks like, learning what performance challenges they have. Because obviously how I approach someone trying to go to special forces is going to look quite a bit different versus what does it look like to approach this veterinarian and this team of veterinarians, and how to increase team culture and cohesion. So there's a lot of curiosity needed. There's a lot of patience needed. And I think the biggest thing, challenge wise, is just not to get too ahead of yourself. Like, you really have to learn and appreciate what these men and women are doing on a day-to-day basis in order for the mental performance consultant to be successful, to be a true value add within that. So as you know, my patience is not one of my stronger suits. So it was a lot of just like, okay, wait, Anthony, wait, like, don't jump in yet. Like, you still don't know all you need to know in order to truly be an asset. So I would say, the learning curve of just learning the Army, but also the patience and almost willpower to hold back would be the biggest challenges.
I hear a lot in there that resonates with, some of our core values. And another reason why we think you're such a great addition to the team is that humility and that curiosity. We always say that that's what leads to growth, is the ability to be humble but stay curious, and to know just what you said, and that, hey, I didn't know everything, but I was open to learning and the growth. And I think you and I kind of have that similarity in that we came from an environment. I think I talked about this on my intro episode as well, that we were encouraged to pick sports to consult with that we had no familiarity with. Probably helped that when you came in and chose cheer, you had, probably the best mentor leading you, right? For our listeners who don't know, when Anthony joined the master's program and started with the cheer team he just spoke about, I was the lead consultant there, and he came in as one of my apprentices. So we go way back when it comes to consulting.
That's right. Under her wing, so to speak.
Under my wing, so to speak. And here we are again. No, that's great. And, I love hearing about your military experiences, but I also know you have a wide range of experiences that you've been pursuing outside of the military. So, if you could tell me a little bit more about some of those experiences that you pursued outside of military work.
It was inspired by some of the military work. So
Hmm.
we taught a course that was basically leadership development,
Hmm.
and it was oriented towards leaders of units, and it would talk about things like how to lead authentically and lead with character, how to increase and enhance motivational climates, how to optimize feedback and development processes. And it maps so beautifully to what the average American especially deals with, and even more internationally in a common workplace. So I again required some reflection and some talking with my wife, and we had these conversations like, okay, like what do I want to be with the military forever, or should I start to at least dip my toes into different waters
Right.
a bit? So I always had this interest in more of the corporate and executive coaching, as well as some of the leadership coaching that went with the military experience. So I found a contract position with a company called Behavioral Essentials, and they've been nothing but great to me, and I owe a lot to them for my own development and things like that. But what they really specialize in is how do we enhance self-awareness at the
Mm.
executive level. And the
Yeah.
idea being that self-awareness and that clarity can trickle down to the rest of the organization and lead to more informed decisions and lead to
Mhm.
healthier motivational climates and ultimately lead to better, more productive, more successful organizations.
Mhm.
And when we put our heads together, and especially me coming from a mental performance background, I was like, well, we really have the opportunity here to be force multipliers. So I've been
Mhm.
incredibly grateful to have experiences over the last year to work with executives of, I mean, very prominent organizations, and to work with them and talk about, hey, like, what are the behaviors that are allowing you to be successful? And what are the behaviors that you see that might be hindering you? Okay, like, how
Mhm.
do we tune into them? How do we continue to build self-awareness to set the foundation for self-regulation? So
Right.
that way you and your organization can see the growth that you're chasing after.
Yeah.
So it's definitely been a little bit of a different hat where, prepping soldiers for special forces and then going into the, well, let's talk about, team dynamics and strategic
Mhm.
planning. It definitely
Yeah.
required some code switching there. So very fruitful nonetheless. And obviously what inspired me to go after the position with Elliot Davis and Amplos ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, you're hitting on some very relevant experience for the role that you're coming into as a performance consultant within, AMPLOS powered by Elliot Davis, and you're going to be doing a lot of that corporate organizational work, a lot of that executive coaching, and it sounds like your past experience really echoes some of the things that we prioritize, which are really accelerating people growth at that organizational level. And the way that you do that is through raising awareness, investing in your people, and investing in your leaders so that you do get those, like you said, trickle down effects. So it's cool to hear that you've been doing some of that work and that you'll continue to do some of that with us. Now, we're talking about Amplos, we're talking about Elliot Davis. Tell us a little bit about what stood out to you when it came to joining Amplos.
So a couple months prior, one Dr. Gabriella Caviedes also got in a position with AMPLOS. So I think I texted her. I was like, "Oh, like tell me a little bit more about this," because I had seen them through like LinkedIn and a little bit on Instagram, and obviously Drew's work with Georgia and Milt's work with
Hmm.
Clemson were obviously the big, almost quote unquote billboards that are like, oh, like these are like very prominent people within the field.
Right.
So when I saw the position opened, I and obviously I'd had a lot of the experiences with the executive and corporate world at this point in December. And I was like, I was like, I should probably text Gabby about this and be like, hey, like, would you think I'd be a good fit for this? So
Hmm.
I got to doing some research, and I saw the position was especially marketed towards individuals that wanted to work with executives, that wanted to work with organizations, that wanted to ultimately make the investment in human capital and realize the potential of human capital.
Hmm.
And I was like, I was like, this seems like a perfect fit in my head. And I almost said it when I first saw it advertised, I was like, what's wrong with this? I was like, what's going on here? I was like, why is this like what are the red flags I need to look for? So didn't find any, obviously, or else I wouldn't be here in this podcast today. But the idea really comes from like I think Amplos is a perfect fit for my own continual growth, and being able to learn from you again, and Drew and Mill, and as Amplos and ultimately Elliot Davis begins to grow, and thinking of the impacts we're capable of as we get into new markets is really, really exciting. But on a more personal level, I think one of the big reasons I got into this field was to help people and to equip people with the tools to be not only successful, but to be satisfied, to be fulfilled. And when we think of the American work experience, a lot of the numbers are pretty alarming. We look at burnout rates, you look at turnover, you look at job dissatisfaction, not only from an organizational success standpoint, but just from like a personal satisfaction and fulfillment standpoint. And
Yeah.
we're able to, as mental performance consultants, take what we learned from athletics, from military context like myself, and be able to plug this into the average working environment, and to be able to help these executives and leaders at all levels build these climates to be more supportive and conducive to everyday people. And when I thought about that opportunity to really be a force multiplier on this kind of a level, it was a shoo-in. Obviously, I had to go, to Greenville and perform well because, there's an interview process. But I think that was
Yeah.
really the two major motivators for me to want to join and be a part of what y'all are building.
hmm And that's one reason we're so excited to bring you on board is, it's so obvious that your values and your passion within this field are very in line with ours and our mission, which is, like you said, to help people and to ultimately pursue better. That's what we always say is we want to help everyone pursue better in their lives, in their professions, with their families. It's really this holistic sense of just constantly striving for better. And to your point, that leads to increased satisfaction, decreased burnout, and so being able to impact that level within organizations, within, leadership positions, like it is such a unique position to be in within our field. So like I said, we're really excited to have you joining. And you mentioned the expansion of our division, how we're going to be growing our human capital team over, the next few months, next couple of years. We're going to hopefully experience some rapid growth. And a part of that is you being in Nashville and being our first employee to actually be in a different location than the rest of the team. Really focused on growing that Nashville market and creating that expansion. So, what are you most excited about when it comes to that?
I mean, I think the thing I'd be most excited about would just be to a lean into some of the curiosity that goes into this, because I think that's one of the biggest,
hmm
the more new things that for me is to talk about growing the business and to talk about
hmm
what it looks like to actually sit down with decision makers and talk about the value add and utility of what we provide. And that includes from like a very specific, a very you know base level idea of like we can help increase profits, we can help increase productivity, but reaching even deeper than that, like we can increase satisfaction, we can
Yeah.
really help to make your organization that much more appealing to this ever competitive job market too. So I
Yeah.
think that's one of the big exciting pieces. And obviously my wife and I recently bought a house in Nashville. So we
Mhm.
really enjoyed the area. We've seen it over the last 3 years, and I know people who've been here way longer than I have, and they've seen just how much it's changed and continue to evolve.
Yeah.
And to be with a company like Elliot Davis that has roots here and has an office here and obviously has collaborating and supporting other businesses within these markets, to be able to wear the hat of enhancing human capital within that
hmm
too just adds another layer, just adds another value point to what we
hmm
do and what we're capable of driving home. So, I mean, there's so many things, but I would say those would be the most exciting parts of what it means to stay here in Nashville and to really focus in on this market that is ever evolving.
It really is. I can't. I think the last time I was in Nashville was almost 2 years ago, and I'm sure it's grown immensely since then and continues to grow, just like here in Greenville. But to your point, like that creates such an opportunity for what you're hitting on are these value conversations where you can go out into the community, something we're very passionate about and something that Elliot Davis is very passionate about, which is getting involved in the community and showing how our services can add that value to the individuals, to the organizations, and to the community. So I know we're excited to have you boots on the ground there advocating for that. And then, I always like to ask this question, which is, what impact, we're all about impact. What impact do you hope to have in this new role?
I think the easiest answer is just at its core, help people thrive in high demand environments. I think that's the tagline that I keep coming back to, the tagline that keeps guiding my work, that keeps guiding my decisions and my own evolution as a worker. And, like I said, the numbers are somewhat alarming. And the idea that we can even make a minor impact on the more global scale of what those numbers mean as it relates to dissatisfaction, burnout, as it relates to even productivity, as it relates to supporting missions that we care about and we can genuinely stand behind. That's what it means for me to be in it, to have an impact. And not only just, me having that impact, but being able to equip leaders and organizations with the tools for them to have their own impact and to be that force multiplier. So that's how I would define my excitement for the impact I'm hoping to bring to the table.
That's great. And you talk about productivity, and that just spurred a memory for me. And I don't know if you even will remember this, but I remember, I think it was close to the time you were graduating, or may have been right after you graduated, but you actually had a podcast going for a stint there. And I believe one of the first episodes, and one that I listened to, was about what you called, I think it was like a productivity monster. Do you remember this? Is this ringing a bell?
I do remember this. Yeah.
It stuck with me. I think I've actually mentioned it on a previous podcast. I love that language around productivity, where we are always trying to find that harmony between performance and well-being. And sometimes when we over-index on performance, that's when we're over-indexing on productivity. We're focused too much on producing and not focusing enough on our overall well-being. So that just spurred a memory for me. So I thought I'd bring that up. That's awesome.
Yeah. Boy, mentally optimal. What a time it was for a podcast.
It was. Hey, it was great. I enjoyed it. Well, I think this has been a really great intro conversation to introduce our listeners to you. I think a cool way to kind of wrap this up would be if you had to give one piece of performance psychology advice to our listeners, what would that be?
Something that always rings true for me is your mind can be your greatest asset, or it can be one of your greatest liabilities. And at its core, building awareness to what thought patterns you have. Because if I ask you to sit there and to tab all of your thoughts, you'd probably think I was insane, because that's quite a bit. But noticing the common patterns, noticing the common strings that keep occurring, especially in the moments that matter, whether it's a massive SEC game for Drew's boys in Georgia, whether it's a massive ACC game for Milt's boys at Clemson, whether it's a board meeting, whether it's going into strategic planning, whether it's an upcoming deployment to Iran, right? Like the idea being how you perceive things, the story, the narrative that you're telling yourself has a crucial impact, not only in how you perform, but to who you are and your identity of yourself. So building awareness to that and optimizing accordingly and restructuring accordingly would be my biggest piece of sport and performance psych tidbit.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love the language around our mindsets either being our greatest asset or our greatest liability. It's so true. The power of mindset is undeniable, and it's something we preach all the time. Well, thank you for that, and thank you for the conversation today. And I hope our listeners enjoyed getting to know you a little bit more on a personal level. They can look forward to hearing you much more frequently on the podcast now as well. And like I said, by the time this goes out, you will have officially been a member of the team for about a week. So we're excited to kind of do some follow-up podcasts together and have you be a regular co-host going forward.
It'll be exciting times to look forward to.
Yeah. Well, thank you to all of our listeners. Please, if you found today interesting and want to continue listening, like, subscribe, do all the things. And we look forward to seeing you on the next Growth Project podcast episode. Thanks, everyone.